You're listening to The Hikam with Shaykh Zahir Bacchus of the Lotri Foundation. In this podcast, Shaykh Zahir explains the aphorisms from Ibn Ata'illah's famous book of wisdoms, Al-Hikam Al-Ata'iyah, a classical manual of spiritual development. Visit seekershub.org for online courses, our reliable answer service, and engaging media.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'ana وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما بفضلك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Ameen. Today we're doing number 78 of the Hikmah, the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah. This particular Hikmah that we're doing, number 78, we talked about something before called hope, and this one is directly about raja, about hope in of itself. So he says, al-raja'u ma qaranahu amalun wa illa fahuwa umniyatun. So he says, hope, raja, is what is accompanied by work, by action. Otherwise, it is but a daydream. Otherwise, it's just false hope or daydreaming. So hope is what is accompanied by work. This is what he says. The believer, as we're told by the scholars of the past and present, hope is one of the highest and the most nobles of stations of certainty or yaqeen, that one is certain in what? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one's creator, certainty in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge of all of the affairs, certainty in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gives and the one that provides and the one that withholds, and certainty that whatever comes to one from because Allah has permitted it, and whatever is prevented from one, it's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ultimately prevented it from one. That is yaqeen, that is certainty, that one has absolute trust in Allah, and that one is guided by Allah, and that one seeks the help of Allah, and that one is thankful to Allah of anything, any good that comes from one, that comes to one. That is certainty, how it is described. And so hope is one of those stations, of the stations of certainty, as the ulama have said. Ibn Abbas is what he says. He said it's one of the stations, one of the maqam. And hope, what does it do? Hope, when it's proper, when hope is proper, when raja is proper, what does it open up for the servant to do? It drives him to acts of worship. That's what it does. Good hope and true hope, it drives the believers to action. What type of actions? Worship. It drives the person to worship. And so the believer is between fear and hope or fear. That's the believer. There are times when the believer will do things or abstain from things because he's fearful of the fire and of punishment. He's fearful of the fire and punishment, so he will abstain from something. He will put himself far from something that will lead to the punishment of Allah. This is fear. Other times his heart is hopeful. Other times his heart is hopeful when he makes a mistake or he sins. He's hopeful of what? Of attaining to the forgiveness of Allah. So what does he do? He puts in place, after a sin is committed, he puts in place something that is praiseworthy. He puts in something that is praiseworthy. He puts an act that is praiseworthy to Allah, in hopes that it is it erases the sin, or in hopes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will overlook it. So what does he put in the place after a sin? Because he's hopeful, he asks for forgiveness. He seeks tawbah. He prays salatul tawbah. He seeks tawbah. Or he does something, an act of worship, in hopes that that is the way of correcting himself from falling into sin again. In hopes that it doesn't fall into sin. And so when one is the person who is hoping for something, he walks, he proceeds to something that is good. He looks for something to do. He looks for something to do for his Lord. When you're hopeful in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you do something in order to gain that pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do something to gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Much like if you're hopeful of, when you become hopeful of getting or attaining a job, you applied for a job, and you're hopeful that this job, that you're going to be hired, because you have the requirements, and you have you satisfy all of the requirements, all of the things that are written, the job description, you satisfy all of them. So you're hopeful for it. When you go to the interview, you're not going to do something contradictory to what they have stipulated. This is hope. You have hope that you're going to attain it, because you satisfy all of the requirements that are there. You satisfy all the requirements. You're not going to go there and do something that contradicts those categories. No, you're going to say things that will lead them to believe that you do fulfill these requirements. When you're hopeful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does it drive you to do? It drives you to do worship. That's what it drives you to do. It doesn't drive you away, or it doesn't drive you to think that, well, I'll worship Allah in some other time. So the person he acts. When you have hope, you act upon it. It's an action, just like when you're fearful of something. When you're fearful of something, what happens? You flee from it. You go as far away as possible from it. When you truly fear something, you don't even want to be in proximity to it. You don't want to be in proximity to it. So there's an action for fearing something too. What is the action for fearing something? Fleeing from what will harm you. Fleeing from what will harm you. That's the action of fearing something. Not doing something that will eventually harm you when you're fearful. Hope is there's an action associated with these maqam. These maqamat, these stations, there are actions associated with it. One does not become into that state. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not put one in that state unless one acts upon it. Unless one acts upon it. One has to act. One has to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One has to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is false hope? False hope, as the ulama they say, is knowing something. Is knowing something. But being lazy in the performance of the actions of worship. This is false hope. That one hopes for the mercy of Allah. Mathalan, one hopes for the mercy of Allah, but one does not do anything. One does not do any acts of worship to put themselves close to Allah so that they can have the mercy of Allah. One does not do anything. One just hopes for it, without any amal, without any actions. One just hopes for the mercy of Allah, or one hopes for forgiveness of Allah, but does not ask for forgiveness, or does not pray salatul tawbah, or does not do good works in order to erase the bad sin or the bad works. This is hope that is in vain. This is a hope that is in vain. It's false hope. And he describes it as what? He describes it as what? He describes it as daydreaming, because that's what it is. Is the khayal? It is the side of the mind that just drives one to imagine things, the imaginative side of things. And normally if it is not coupled with something that is tangible, when it's not coupled with something that is tangible, what is tangible is worship. What is tangible is an action or a word or words. That's tangible. When it is accompanied with it, then it becomes hope. Otherwise, it stays as imaginations or daydreaming. That one daydreams. One can daydream about Jannah and being in Jannah. One can daydream about it. One can have a dream and dream about being rich. One can dream about being rich and successful. If one sits on one's couch and does nothing except dreaming about it and thinking about it and wanting it, but does not do anything about it, how are you going to attain it? How are you going to attain it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted believers to believe in Him and to come back to Him. What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? Although He could have just put belief in their hearts. He does. But He could merely put belief in there. What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? What is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He wanted mankind to come back to Him? What is the sunnah of Allah? What did He do? He sent messengers. He sent messengers. He sent messengers to teach them about what to do and to talk to them and to lead them back to Him, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sent messengers. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did. He sent messengers to lead them back to Him. And the way of the messengers is to teach them what? Not just how to lead them back with words or to be hopeful in Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, but He taught them, the messengers taught them how to act. He taught them how to worship Allah. The messengers came and taught how to worship Allah in every single aspect of one's life. Well, the message Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent for. To display to us how to act and how to be. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent messengers so that they can couple their belief. They couple their belief with what? Action. They couple their belief with action. You believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is what you need to do. This is the things that you need to abstain from. These are the things that you have to do. These are the things that are recommended to do. These are things that are permissible to do. These are things that are impermissible to do. These are things that will lead you to sin, so abstain from them. These are things that are commanded to you to adhere to them. So He sent messengers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to display to them what? That even though when they want something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's an action that is accompanied with it. There's an action that is accompanied with it. The Prophet ﷺ in the Battle of Badr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this comes from the Musnad Imam Ahmad. The Prophet ﷺ when he went to the battle, he was hopeful of what? Of victory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before the battle, He showed the Prophet, this is in the Imam Ahmad, the Musnad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired in him to know the places where the mushrikeen were going to fall, certain ones of them. He pointed out the place to the Prophet ﷺ, the places where the idolaters, certain of them, would fall, would be killed. That was hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him, that this is what was going to occur, that he would be granted victory. However, the Prophet ﷺ, he was hopeful of the victory, of course. What did he do? What did the Prophet ﷺ do before the battle? What he did, and is narrated, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu narrates it, that when he went to sleep before the battle in the day, that he saw the Prophet ﷺ up, and he was making dua, that he was praying. He was holding up his hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he was praying. He was supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he went to sleep. When he woke up, he saw the Prophet ﷺ in the same place. His hands was up in the skies and he was still making dua. He was still making dua. What does it prove? What it proves is that if you're hopeful of something, you want something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What do you have to do about it? What you have to do about it is to perform an act. What you have to do about it is to perform an act. You just can't hope for it and do nothing about it. Show it nowhere in one's actions. And so the person who has this hope, then the person is going to be driven to do an action. Ma'ruf al-Kharqi, rahmatullahi alayhi, Ma'ruf al-Kharqi was one of the great saliheens of the past. He says what? And scholars, he said, seeking paradise without any action is a sin amongst the sins. Seeking paradise without any actions is a sin. Is a sin amongst the sins. And hoping for intercession without any reason is a type of delusion. Hoping for intercession, meaning what? Hoping that you're going to be granted help, or someone's going to intercede for you. Without any reason is a type of delusion. And hoping for mercy from someone who one does not obey is plain ignorance. Hoping for mercy from someone who one does not obey is just simple ignorance. It's ignorance. And so what does he say? That if you're hoping mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but one does not obey Him, one does not act and does worship, how can one expect the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can one expect the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can one expect the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if one is disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If one is disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how can one gain the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by being disobedient to Him? By not ridding in one's life the haram. If one does not rid from one's life the haram, how does one expect the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive them or have mercy upon them? If one does not rid from one's life all of the haram that are within one's life. And sometimes people are fooled. People are fooled by having success. They're fooled by having success from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they don't rid themselves of the haram. So something may be going right for them. They may have a lot of things going right for them. Which cases which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is causing them to be deluded, or they're deluded by themselves. But they don't rid themselves of the haram. They may earn the haram. They may be in jobs that are earning the haram. And they may have things in their life that are haram, that they're willing to accept, like riba. They may be in houses that are financed through a bank. This is riba. It's interest and it's haram. And everything may be good to them. But they're deluded. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bring it as hujjah against them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can provide it as proof against them. If one is truly in the state of loving Allah and wanting the best from Allah, one would rid oneself of all of the haram. All of the haram. One would go far away from all of the haram. All of the haram. Instead of picking and choosing. We live in a time where people pick and choose. That's the time that we live in. They pick and choose what they want to do. They pick and choose what they want to do. They may want to perfect their prayer and pray in the best of way and call to, will pray according to Quran and Sunnah. But when it comes to ridding themselves of the haram, they don't abide by Quran and Sunnah. They live in their mortgage houses. They go to their jobs that earn the haram. Where's the Quran and Sunnah then? Where is it then? This is delusion. These people are just deluded. That's all they're just deluded. They live in delusion. Hope is when you do what? If you're hopeful of the mercy of Allah, then you rid yourself, you do something about it. Not just worship, but you do something about it. If you're hopeful of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, should the mercy of Allah come from someone who is disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Should the mercy come to one who is disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So the person has to understand, the Prophet ﷺ, he says the intelligent person is the one who takes himself to task and works for what is ba'd al-maut, works for what is after death. What is the intelligent person? Who is the intelligent person? The person who takes himself to task and works for what comes after death. What comes after death? What comes, you stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the incapable one is the one who lets himself follow its desire. Who is the incapable one? The incapable one who makes excuses. He's staunch on some things and he's relaxed on other things. He's staunch on some things, and this is the majority of the ummah. They're staunch on some things, very staunch. They're so staunch on it and strict on it, but they're relaxed on other things. They relax on other things. This is what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. And so is the one, and the incapable one is the one who is what? Who allows his self to follow its desires. He allows himself to follow his desires. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and he holds vain hopes about Allah. He has false hopes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ said. So the intelligent one is the one who takes himself to tasks. He takes himself to tasks and he works for what is after death. Not what is in this world. Takes himself to task for what is in the next world. Because that's what he's seeking. What comes after death is what he's seeking. Not what comes before death. Is what comes after death. And so his hope is not in vain. He doesn't hold false hope with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If someone wants to rectify themselves, they rectify themselves in every single way. They rectify themselves in every single way. It may take small steps. To rectify yourself fully may take small steps. It may take small steps. But once you get on that path of rectifying yourself, stay on it. What happens to people is they become deluded. They want to rectify themselves. They start to pray. They start to learn. And then what happens? The shaitan comes to them and makes them arrogant. The shaitan comes and makes them arrogant. They want to rectify themselves, so they start. They start the process. They start the process of rectifying themselves. So they go on the path and they learn stuff. And they want to learn. And they start to pray. And they start to learn how to pray in whatever way they want to. And they start. And then what happens? The shaitan comes to them and makes them arrogant. What happens? The shaitan comes and makes them arrogant. And then they begin to think that they know everything. That happens. It happens. A manifestation of lots of people that happens to. The shaitan comes and makes them think they're better than others. They forget where they came from, the ignorance that they came from. They forget. They forget about it. So what happens? They become arrogant in the think that they know everything now. That's what they think. And so they're unwilling to learn anymore because they think they know everything. And so they may rectify their prayer, they may rectify their salah, their fasting, whatever. Everything else then stays the same. They don't rectify their tongue, so they speak ill about people. They backbite. They complain about things they shouldn't complain about. They don't rectify the haram income they have, so they make excuses. They don't rectify the mortgages that they have on their houses, they just stay in it. They make excuses. This is false hope. That's all it is. And they're deluded, and their delusion is from the shaitan and themselves. That's their delusion. Their delusion comes by their own self. Their delusion comes from their own self. Hope, why is it called a station? Why do the mutasawwif, the people of spirituality, call it a station? Why is it a station? Because everything in the person's life is exemplary to their hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why. Why is it a station? Because they, all throughout their life, no matter what it is, doesn't matter, salah, fasting, the way they speak, the way they think about others, the opinions they have about others, their protecting of their ears, their protecting of their touch, what they eat, what goes into their body, what they earn, how they deal with their kids, how they deal with their parents, how they deal with their wives, how they deal with their brothers, how they deal with their sisters, where they are, where they go, where they end up, where they stand. Every single thing is exemplary to what? To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they're hopeful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. That's why it's called a station. If you're there, if you're in that maqam, it's not a maqam of delusion. It's not. It's not a maqam of delusion. It's a maqam of yaqeen, certainty. That certainty brings about what? Rida of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That one is pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One is pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether there is darra or sarra, whether there is sarra, there is goodness, there's prosperity, or darra, or adversity. Whether there is this or that, they are the same to their Lord. Same. They are the same. Their salah is the same. Their dua is the same. Their sujood is the same. Their sawm is the same. Their recitation of Quran is the same. Their giving is the same. Everything about them is the same. It's a maqam. It doesn't leave. It doesn't leave. It's a station that doesn't leave. This is the true believer. That's the believer yaqeen. The believer who has certainty in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because he's not deluded. The path of spirituality is the path of leaving delusion behind. That's all it is. The path of leaving delusion behind. Someone wants to get better, and they only pick certain aspects of their life to get better. Yeah, pick certain aspects to work on, and then expand it to work on other aspects of one's life. Pick an aspect, you work on it. Pick another aspect, you work on it. Gradually, it's a progression that includes the entire self, and in the entirety of what one does or what one is involved with, the entirety of it. That's what spirituality, at the end of the day, is, and it's prophetic. It's a prophetic way. This is the prophetic way. Is to what? What is the prophetic way? And ta'budullah ka'annaka tarahu, is to worship Allah as though you see Him. Not through one aspect of your life. What is it? Ta'budullah ka'annaka tarahu. Is to worship Allah as the Prophet ﷺ said. This is how he describes spirituality in a Sahih hadith. Is to worship Allah as though you see Him. وَإِلَّمْ يَكُنْ تَرَاهُ, and if you do not see Him, then what? Then know that He sees you. فَهُوَ يَرَاكَ. Know that He sees you. Through what? Through just the aspect of prayer? No. Through the aspect of coming to the masjid? No. When does Allah see you? Everywhere. When do you hope to see Allah? Everywhere. Through everything. Your entirety of your being. Everything that you do. Everything that you do. So where's the lapse? Where's the lapse then of not knowing this? The lapse then comes from us. It's from us. That is what the Prophet ﷺ is hopeful. That's what he wants of the believers. This is ihsan, spirituality as he describes it. That's what he wants. That's what he wants. And so having deficiency and working on it is a blessing. Why is it a blessing? Having deficiency and working on it, why is it a blessing? Because it disables you from becoming prideful. That's all. Why is deficiency a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because if you were perfect, there's more chance that shaitan will come to you and delude you and give you arrogance. Having deficiency, knowing your deficiency, working on your deficiency is a tremendous blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Knowing it is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're deficient in something, thank Allah for it. Thank Allah that you know it. Thank Allah subhanahu that you know it. Because then you're able to do something about it. You're able to do something about it. Having deficiency, you know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there are those who came to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they got afflicted with masathum ad-darra, that they were touched by difficulty until they said, wa Rasul وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ, and those who believed in him, the messenger, and those who believed with him, they say, Mata Nasrullah, when is the help of Allah? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ala inna Nasrullah, that verily the help of Allah is close. The help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is close. What happened? Difficulties came to them, as it afflicted those who came before them. Difficulty touched them as it touched those who came before them, until they question, an internal question, when will the help of Allah come? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to them that the help is already there. That is the meaning of the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, that the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is already there. What is the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already there? What is the help of Allah? Knowing that they need Allah is the help of Allah. Knowing that you need Allah is His help. Because if you didn't think you need Him, then you wouldn't call upon Him. If you don't know there's a deficiency in you, you wouldn't work on it. Then there wouldn't be any hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us imperfect for that reason, so that we can hit to the maqams that we can go to. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and guide us. Forgive us, have mercy upon us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our parents, our elders, give them good health and long life. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in closeness, practice to Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who have passed away, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them His mercy, His maghfirah and His shade. Those who are sick, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help them and cure them, heal them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive and protect and provide assistance to all of our brothers and our sisters faced with difficulties. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our children, keep them on the straight path, make their footing firm in His deen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and forgive us, have mercy upon us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in knowledge and practice of our deen, the correct knowledge and practice, protect our ulama. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala safeguard them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect their dignity and their honor. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our homes from amongst the homes of the believers. Make our last words our very best words. Subhanakallah hamdik shadu la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
Thank you for listening to The Hikam with Shaykh Zahir Bacchus. Help Seekers Hub spread the light of guidance to millions around the world by supporting us through monthly donations by going to seekershub.org/donate. Your donations are tax deductible in the US and Canada.